Hey, how's it going? This is Ryan Velasquez, and you're listening to the first edition of the Front Row podcast on frontrowreservation.com. I've been trying to get this show off the ground for a while now, so it's nice to finally have everything up and running on Monday, January 11th, 2016. Got plenty to talk about today. I'm still trying to figure out what the best format is going to be for this show. Probably going to be a lot of trial and error over the first handful of episodes or so. Going to be flying solo today, just going over everything that we got on our plate at the moment as far as sports is concerned. But hopefully, I'll be able to get some guests on here in the future and kind of mix things up a little bit from there. But yeah, between the NFL playoffs, first round results, you got the national championship game tonight, college football that we've had plenty of time to count down to, and coaching changes in the NFL. I mean, you name it. We've got just about everything going on right now. So hopefully this will be a fun show, and you guys can have fun just kicking back and listening to it wherever you are, whether you're driving home from work or what have you. But hopefully this will be at least a once a week type of thing. I'm gonna do my best to get two of these shows in a week, but no fewer than one. So, like I said, a lot of trial and error. Gonna finally put this broadcast degree of mine to good use, hopefully, and we'll kind of go from there. So, anyway, let's get started with Wild Card Weekend. It's amazing that for to go into this with the current playoff format, never having had all of the wild card teams come away with wins. All four wild card teams go 4-0. It's a little surprising that it doesn't really feel like much of a shock. I know that I think 3 out of the 4 were favored. I think Washington was the only one out of the division winners that was favored to win in the first round. But you would feel like it would be a bigger deal, and it really. I think I picked all three, all each of the first 3 games correctly. I thought Washington would beat Green Bay, but for something that's never happened before, I think that just goes to show you just how bad so many of the division winners were this year. But yeah, all 4 wild card teams coming away with wins, all 4 road teams, and it really doesn't feel like much of a surprise. But I'll tell you though, for a league that has sort of prided itself on creating an image of being progressive, moving into the future, streamlining their product. It's amazing how little things change from an on the field perspective as far as the results go. Cincinnati and Minnesota. I mean, you talk about 2 teams that have just can't remember the last time anything good happened for them in the postseason. Doesn't matter how many players are changing uniforms, who the coach is on the sideline. I mean, good grief, those 2 fan bases, and then to lose to the Steelers and the Seahawks just goes to show you just how little things change. And I'll tell you what, as painful as that was for Minnesota, you guys got to feel good about the group that you have going forward. That wasn't quite Gary Anderson in 1999 bad, but to miss a 27-yarder, I know that's good grief. That's tough. But you got Teddy Bridgewater. He's proven that he is a reliable guy behind center. He's not quite as far along as Derek Carr or Blake Bortles as far as the rest of that draft class is concerned, but you got to feel good about that. You got some young receivers. That offensive line got a little bit better this year. The front 4 was fantastic on defense. They were just as good as Seattle's front 4 the whole game. Russell Wilson didn't have anywhere to go early on. So you got to feel good about what you get coming back next year. I know good grief, that was awful what we all watched on Sunday, but it's not quite as bad as what's going on in Cincinnati, in my opinion. But yeah, Cincinnati. I mean, at least if you're Minnesota, you played a good game. I mean, you played well down the stretch. I mean, you got to score a touchdown if you're expecting to beat Seattle in the playoffs, but at least you got a good foundation. Mike Zimmer's come in and handled things well as head coach, which is something that Minnesota hasn't had in a long time. Dennis Green's probably the last quality head coach that they've had up there. So you got to feel good about the future. Painful as it was, I think Minnesota is going to be around for a little while, but Cincinnati, I think they got a much bigger problem going on, and I would not be surprised if we're about to see the end of Marvin Lewis here coming up, which is hard because this was their fifth straight playoff appearance, which is the first time that's ever happened in franchise history, I believe. I don't have the fact sheet in front of me, but I'm pretty sure that that's true. Um, but to lose like that, I mean, not the Jeremy Hill fumble was bad, but to give up 30 yards in personal foul penalties to a team who just needs a field goal to win at home, I mean, that's about as bad as you get. And I'm not sure how you fix that without just cleaning house. That's an internal problem. You can't be making mistakes like that. And Perfect, I mean, he made the interception. He does the celebration. That's bad, but at least he makes the play. And dirty as the hit was on Antonio Brown, I just don't know how a player of his quality, a veteran player, cannot have the mental composure to understand that you can't even think about putting yourself in a position where you can draw a penalty like that. I know a lot of those helmet to helmet hits are close, but that was just about as dumb as you get in a situation where you've got the lead. You're playing against a quarterback who can't throw it 5 yards down the field, and you're going to give him that. And then Pac Man Jones, I mean, of all people, Pac Man Jones is going to get this penalty. And Joey Porter doesn't deserve a free pass for being on the field the way he was, running his mouth, doing all that kind of thing. But you can't even think about getting a penalty right there if you're Cincinnati. So to give him 30 yards on personal fouls for two guys, two knuckleheads, who just the same old story in a situation where all you got to do is stop a guy who has a separated shoulder. You got a buck 23 to go. Just make sure they don't get in the field goal range, and you're going to spot them 30 yards at home. I mean, that's the type of thing that gets your coach fired. And Marvin Lewis has built up a pretty good roster. He's got a pretty good wins losses track record, but when that kind of thing's happening, it's different. It's a different problem than what the Broncos had last year with John Fox. But when you're losing playoff games that way, I don't know how else you got to go about it than starting with a new head coach and trimming up that roster a little bit, and especially a guy like Pac-Man Jones who's not in his prime anymore. You got to make sure you don't give him any reason to move on and switch things up. So I don't know how you keep him. Burfict's a different story, I think, but I would be surprised if Pac-Man. I would not be surprised if Pac-Man's looking for a new home next year. Nor would I if Marvin Lewis is on the market. Even though the market's a little thin, that's a tough loss to come back from if you're a head coach. And it's tough. You don't have Andy Dalton in there. You don't have your guy. But I thought A.J. McCarron played well enough to give you a win. That last drive, he had the fourth down conversion, took him down, found A.J. Green. He put him in position. You can't put that one on him. And even though Jeremy Hill had the fumble, he did well enough to put them in a good position. He had the touchdown earlier. And if you're a defense with a minute 23 to go, you're playing against a guy who can't throw anymore. You got to be able to close that one out. You got to be able to find a way. So I don't think that's definitely not on Jeremy Hill, in my opinion. But yeah, Minnesota, Cincinnati, same old story. Heartbreak in the playoffs. Cincinnati, I guess they haven't won since 1990, unless I'm mistaken, in the postseason. Marvin Lewis 0-7 now. You've lost each of the last 5 years. Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked at all. I would not be surprised if we see a coaching change in Cincinnati this offseason. So we'll have to see what happens there. I was expecting a much closer game in Houston though. I thought because those guys have played pretty well the last half of the year defensively, they got a lot better. Um, Even without a healthy Clowney in there, J.J. Watt obviously is the guy on the line. The secondaries played well. Linebackers, they've that whole defense. They were horrible the first half of the year. Had the blowouts in Atlanta and Miami. They'd come a long way. Even with Brian Hoyer offensively, they were doing all right. They were doing enough to make things happen. DeAndre Hopkins come along as one of the best receivers in the league this year. And even the Vegas line, I think that I believe Kansas City was only favored by 3.5 to win that one. I thought it would be close. But the Chiefs. Speaking of another team that hadn't won in the playoffs in a while, 1994 was the last one, and they went out and didn't even mess around. Niall Davis returns the opening kick. Alex Smith plays a great game. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with Jeremy Maclin as far as next week in New England is concerned. But yeah, Kansas City, the AFC is kind of a mess. I think anybody who's watched this season would agree with me on that one. Kind of a mess. I would not be surprised if Kansas City is the team that represents the AFC in the Super Bowl. Obviously, playing in Foxborough is no picnic, but the way that defense is playing right now, Alex Smith, I was reading something earlier today. Out of all the quarterbacks that are left in the playoffs, he's got the best touchdown interception ratio of them all. I think it's 10-1. So keep an eye on those guys. They've won, I guess, what is it, 11 in a row now? They started off 1-5, 2-5. They came all the way back up. So keep an eye on them. Keep an eye on that game in New England next weekend. I generally don't pick against Tom Brady in the playoffs at home, especially, but that might be your upset because you always get one of those teams that had a first round bye always seems to find a way to lose. I can't remember the last time we didn't have any of those home teams lose. So keep an eye on that one. Keep an eye on Kansas City and New England. And then I thought that Washington was going to beat the Packers, even with Aaron Rodgers on the other side. Those guys just haven't looked right since probably September. I don't know what's going on there. I thought for sure that Washington was going to score the upset. I really like what they're putting together there with Kirk Cousins. That defense is playing well. Jay Gruden has gotten significantly better on the sideline this season. They've got some talented wide receivers. It's nice getting Deshaun Jackson back for the second half of the season. And Jordan Reed, good grief, that guy, he's come a long way. He looks pretty sharp out there at tight end. So I was expecting them to keep the wild card teams from going 4-0, but Aaron Rodgers, when he turns it on, you can forget about it. And he turned it on. He didn't look sharp early, but he got going. The running game. If they can keep playing like that, that might be interesting in Arizona. even though it was just what was it, 2 weeks ago? It looked horrible. Arizona smoked them, but that might be interesting next week as well. I'm not sure which of the divisional home teams I really trust the most. To be quite frank, that Carolina Seattle game's going to be interesting. Um, yeah, Seattle in the playoffs. Anytime you're messing around with those guys, you really don't know what's going to happen. Arizona, even though they didn't look great the last week of the season, I know they had a lot of their reserves in, but you got to play Aaron Rodgers in the playoffs. You never know what's going to happen there. I've already talked about Kansas City and New England. And then Denver, I believe the line for that game, okay, they changed it. Going into the day, going into earlier this morning when I was looking at the lines, the Vegas lines, I believe they had the Broncos minus 6.5 for that game, which I imagine was had everything to do with whether or not Roethlisberger was going to be healthy enough to go. Like I said, the last report I read was a separated shoulder for him. Now they're saying it's an even line. That sounds about right to me. Yeah, that take your pick with the home teams in the divisional round. I don't trust the Broncos. No matter who you got playing quarterback, those guys they just can't seem to score. No matter what they do on a consistent basis, they just can't seem to find any sort of rhythm that can lead to consistent offense. And you don't want to have that problem when you're playing a team as disciplined as the Steelers in the playoffs, no matter how healthy their quarterback is. So I would probably pick that if Roethlisberger's healthy enough. If it's nothing too serious with that throwing shoulder, that would probably be my pick as the upset to keep an eye on next week. I hope I'm wrong. I'd love to see the Broncos keep winning, but I just don't like the way that offense looks right now. So that's probably, if I had to pick an upset, that would be the one. If you'd even call it an upset, the line's even right now in the Vegas books. Um, Cardinals are giving up a touchdown. I'm a little surprised about that. I think Green Bay, if they can keep running the ball the way that they did yesterday, Eddie Lacy looked sharp. You got James Starks in there. He's a little hit or miss, but he ran hard. He ran well. If they play like that, that's going to be closer than most people are thinking. They got the Patriots are favored by 5. That sounds about right. It's too bad that offensive line. If they were a little bit healthier, I think those guys would be right back where they were last year. Um, and then you got the Panthers giving up 3, which is a little surprising. But Seattle in the playoffs, you would imagine. I guess that reputation kind of speaks for itself at this point. That'll be. I can't remember the last time. Let's see. Only 2 other teams have won their conference and gone to the Super Bowl 3 years in a row. And off the top of my head, I want to say that obviously the Bills in the early '90s won 4 in a row, and I believe the Dolphins in the early '70s. That's it. So you don't. It doesn't happen. Teams going to the Super Bowl 3 straight seasons, and Seattle's got a real chance if they, even without Marshawn Lynch, who it sounded like he was going to play yesterday, and obviously he didn't even dress out. But keep an eye on those guys. If they get through the Panthers, then I really like their chances to beat either Arizona or Green Bay. That's an interesting matchup too. Really, I wrote a few weeks ago. The Panthers have basically taken that same model and put in a bigger, stronger quarterback, and that's how you go 15-1. That defense has played great, even without Kelvin Benjamin. Um, for Cam Newton to be as efficient as he's been this year and to be able to run the ball the way that he's done that as well, um, that's pretty impressive. Which is a little bit of an understatement. That's kind of been the topic of conversation for several months now. Um, so keep that. That's going to be a fun one. That's two very similar teams. I think the Panthers get the slight nod just because they are a little bit healthier probably on offense. That's going to be a good one. That's going to be good. So moving on, we got a big game coming up here in a few hours. I've been writing all season long, and this is not a knock against Clemson. I hate Clemson. I mean, Lord knows. I hope Clemson loses badly tonight, but they. I don't think there's any question that they're the second best team in the country, in my opinion. I don't think there's any doubt, but I think that Alabama has been, ever since the LSU game, I don't think there's any question that those guys are miles ahead of everybody else. And I don't think it's even a conversation at this point. Um, that front seven is the best front seven I've seen from a Nick Saban team. And you could take your pick from the guys that he's had during his time at Alabama, and this one's, I don't think it's even close the way that they're playing right now. What they did to Leonard Fournette, what they just did to Michigan State. And Michigan State, I think that too many people were transfixed on Michigan State getting blown away more so than Alabama doing the work to get that done. I think Michigan State is still one of the four best teams in the country. And I think that we're going to see a similar type of situation tonight against Clemson. I think that, you look at the teams that have managed to beat Alabama the past couple of years. You hear a lot of people talk about the mobile quarterbacks that beat them, the Johnny Manziels. Who else? Jordan Jefferson beat them at LSU. I guess you'd call Steven Garcia a mobile quarterback. Not quite as much as those other two, but I'm not sure that that's the perfect formula, though, if you're looking at how exactly to beat them. I don't think it's a clear-cut method. I think the only way Clemson wins this game tonight is if Deshaun Watson is flawless and that defense finds a way to put enough pressure on Jake Coker to force him to make a few mistakes. And if they can find a way to somehow get an early lead and sort of take away what Bama wants to do as far as just giving it to Derrick Henry over and over and over. If they get into that rhythm, you can forget about it. But if Clemson somehow forces an early turnover, kind of what Ole Miss did earlier this year, I think that that's the closest thing to the formula to beating Alabama. If you can score early on them, find a way to get an early lead, force them to do a couple of things that they don't particularly like to do, get out of that run it, open up the play action, comfort zone they like to get into. I think that's the only way that it's going to happen. And Deshaun Watson's going to have to play a near perfect game, I think, in order to do that, which he could. That guy, I've been talking about him all year. He is as smooth at that position and composed as just about any college quarterback I've ever seen. You hear some of the Clemson fans I've talked to this year who are trying to decide who they would prefer between Deshaun and Taj Boyd, and it's not even close. Not even a contest, in my opinion. Taj was great against the lower level teams, the Wake Forests, and the Virginias, the Marylands, the lesser teams of the ACC. He could put up those numbers, and that was basically what he built his short-lived Heisman campaign on. Um, but you put him up against a team that could rush the passer, and you saw a different animal. Um, just you could see it. I remember covering those USC Clemson games during the 5-game winning streak that feels like about 30 years ago now. For those of you that have watched South Carolina's defense the past 2 years, which will hopefully be changing, but we'll that's for another podcast. But if you watched his composure as those games went on, you could see him drop back immediately. He's looking for where the pass rush is coming from. He's looking at number 7. He's looking at Melvin Ingram. He's not even looking at his receivers. You don't see that at a Deshaun Watson. Not once has he looked uncomfortable back behind center in a game that was close. He looked as cool as can be in Columbia early this year, with the game starting to get away from him against the Gamecocks. He looked, even last year. You can go back to last year, that game in Tallahassee that they lost. It wasn't because of him, and I believe that was his 3rd or 4th game that he'd ever played in college football. So I don't think we're going to see any mental meltdowns on Clemson's side of the ball tonight. I think the only way, though, that they've got a chance to win this one is to score a touchdown on one of their first 2 drives, get into a rhythm like they like to do, and just start moving the ball, and kind of making things happen from there. But if Bama gets a couple of stops, if they force a turnover early, and Clemson has to become one-dimensional, I don't think it's going to even be close. The line is at 6.5 favoring Bama right now. I believe that it's going to be something a lot along those lines. I'm going to guess 24-20 Alabama wins in this one. I think Clemson will score a late touchdown and be in a situation where they attempt an onside kick, something along those lines, and can't get the ball back. I think Bama is going to settle in, do what they like to do, and get into that rhythm in the running game and just kind of go from there. I just don't think that Clemson's going to have enough to stop that running game from getting into doing what they like to do best. Derrick Henry, if he gets 30 touches tonight, I think it's a no-doubter for Alabama, which would be Saban's 5th national championship, 4th at Alabama. Throws him in the conversation of best of all time. I don't think there's any doubt. So, but I think it's going to be. I think Clemson is going to put up a little better fight than people are expecting. Most of the people I've talked to, anyway. So, but yeah, I'm thinking 24-20 for Alabama. So, but yeah, that about does it for today's show. Like I said, I'm going to try to get at least one of these done a week. Hopefully 2 a week. Still trying to find what the best setup is going to be for this. Like I said, bear with me over these first couple of shows. Going to be a lot of trial and error, I'm sure. Trying to find some footing here, but hopefully I'll be able to get some guests on here. We're going to have plenty of NFL stuff to talk about. The aftermath of tonight's game in college football, we'll have plenty of that too. We're going to have draft stuff coming up here before too long, March Madness. So it's going to be fun. And like I said, I'm going to try to get one of these a week, hopefully 2, and we'll kind of go from there. So anyway, this is the Front Row Podcast. Y'all have a good one.